Thank you, everybody, for joining us here today to talk a little bit about residential home scams. We're going to talk a little bit about scams that happen at a home, how you can be aware of them, things you can do to prevent them, and just some of the nitty-gritty that goes into home scams. So my name is Katie Zerl, and I'm the crime prevention specialist here with Bloomington Police. And today I am joined with Detective Chad Hayes in our investigations unit. Chad has often been working on cases of scams, so I really appreciate him joining me here today to talk about this important topic.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Katie. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks so much. So let's get into it. Why is it important for us to even be talking about scams that happen at the home?
Well, it's extremely important because of the prevalence, the amount of scams that are happening not only in our city, but throughout the metro area, and just being aware of some of the different tactics and things that they're doing and using in order to make victims out of our citizens.
Yeah, it's so true. And with scams, I think it's one of those things that it's not a once and done where you can say, hey, I know about scams and I'm good for life. I don't need to know about them anymore. I think scams is one of those interesting things in crime prevention work and law enforcement work that we think we tackle one, and criminals are sometimes a step ahead of us trying to reinvent them, come up with new ones. And so it's always important to be aware of what scams are happening and new trends that are out there. So thanks for bringing awareness to this topic. Can anyone come to your residence in an attempt to sell you something? Can anyone just show up at your home saying, I want to sell you a product? Tell us what you know about that.
So, in the city of Bloomington and a lot of other cities, we do require that there is a solicitor's license that they have to apply for. On the solicitor license, they would, the city would verify that they are a legitimate company, also verify who the person is, and things like that. So, in order to come to your house, uh, per our city ordinance, they would have to be able to present that if they're asked. Also, they would have to abide by any signage that you have saying that solicitors are not welcome. They would not be able to come to your door in that instance because that would be a violation of the city ordinance.
Great information. And I know the city has some licensing hours too that people can't come to residences, after I think it's between 9 and 9, so 9 a.m. and 9 p.m. So people shouldn't be soliciting at your door after those hours. There are some exemptions to the solicitor information, and people can dig into that information through the City of Bloomington, through the licensing department. For specifics on exact solicitor licenses and what that all means. But the gist of it is if somebody would show up to your home to sell you, say, a home product, say a roof or road work for a driveway or siding, somebody along those lines should be having a solicitor license. And that license would look like something here on the screen. Oftentimes, I think people get confused that they'll say, well, they showed me a business card from a business. Is that it? Or they waved a badge at me, but you certainly have every right as a Bloomington resident to ask to see that solicitor license. And it should look like something here on the screen. It does have an expiration date. It should list their name and business and have a photo ID. So I think that's something good for residents to know, that the City of Bloomington does their best effort to try to protect residents in this way.
And you should also keep in mind that if you do ask to see that and somebody seems offended by that question, they're probably not a legitimate solicitor, because that's something that people who come into our city should expect, that residents do have the right to ask you for that information.
Great information. Thanks so much for sharing that. What are some of the common tactics that are used in home scams? What are some things that you see in cases that you've worked on, reports that we've taken recently within our police department?
So one of the more common is extra materials. Hey, I was working down the street, for instance, seal coated your neighbor's driveway. They told me that you might be interested, and I have this extra material, so I'm going to get you a great deal. that sort of thing. You know, saying we'll be back tomorrow, asking for a down payment, which might sound like a great deal, but they just might not show back up if you do give them money. Also distracting you, trying to get you out of the house. Those sorts of things are tactics that we see often, not only here, but around the metro.
For sure, good information. Oftentimes, too, I know some of the recent scams that I've read is they often don't just come as an individual person. Sometimes they'll come within groups of two, three, or four people, or sometimes it'll start as two and then they'll say, we have to go get more materials or we have to go pick somebody up to come help us. And then they return with additional people. So I think sometimes that can be a key indicator, too, if suddenly new people are brought in and you're not quite sure about what that relationship is. So I think that's a good thing to be aware of as well. Another thing that recently I learned myself, I have not had an asphalt driveway, so it's just been uncommon to me. But I know for some theft by swindle cases, we'll have that material theft that you're talking about, and people will say we have extra material, we'll do this for a great deal, and the deal that they'll end up offering has costed around like a $2,000 mark. But in looking to the national averages for seal coating, the average cost in the nation is $160 to do a seal coat for a driveway. So that was really surprising to me because you hear a number and you think that oh, maybe I am getting a deal because they're telling me that. But the costs for seal coating oftentimes is one area that we do see people kind of taking advantage of for getting overpriced on their items. Um, so yeah, I think that's good information for people to be aware of. What do we know about payment precautions? So if somebody does decide to engage in a contract at a door and says, oh, I'm willing to buy your purchase this product or have you do this work for me, what kind of things can we leave with our listeners about payment precautions?
So there's a couple different techniques that are used. One of them is like you were just talking about, all of a sudden something that you agreed upon is uh, way higher than they had promised you or quoted you. Another thing that they do is say, I'm going to charge you $200, and then they say, but I'm actually going to do it for 150. Can you break this money that you gave me? Just trying to see if you have cash in the house. So there's a lot of different techniques and things that people are out there trying to do to kind of assess the situation of who their victim's going to be.
Yeah, for sure. I know it's also wise to not let people into your home. That often I've seen in some cases too, where they will let some contractors into their home, and that's often a time that they're scoping out the residents to see what they know, and if that person in the home will then watch if you do go get funds from a safe. That now they do know which even area of the home you went to, or possibly quite specifically where your safe is located, and then they know that if you've gone there to retrieve cash that it's likely that there's more cash. So we saw a recent case where somebody had then returned to the property and used that distraction theft that we were talking about a bit to get the homeowner to the backyard, engages in like a lengthy conversation with them, doesn't really allow for them to kind of even understand or assess the situation. And ultimately, in the meantime, the people who are working with them have now snuck into the home and have burglarized access to safe and have taken funds from it. So we have seen those kind of cases here in Bloomington. So it's very important information to know to make sure that you're keeping your safe in a location that anyone does not know where it's at or how to access it, to make sure that you're taking all precautions for that as well.
And I would, and
Oftentimes, go ahead.
I'm sorry, I would just add that a lot of times it's people being afraid of being rude. Um, if somebody's doing work outside your house, most reputable companies will tell their employees not to use the restroom you know, at the client's house. They'll leave and go somewhere else, go to a convenience store. So don't be afraid of not allowing people into your house. because it does give them an opportunity to kind of survey what's inside. But that's one thing that when I do talk to victims, a lot of people say, well, I just felt kind of rude. I didn't want to not say that you couldn't come in the house. But if they're doing work outside, they don't have a reason to come into your house.
Very good information. Thanks so much for sharing that. Another one, can you talk a little bit about where maybe they'll offer to engage in that work and it might be like, for example, with seal coating comes to mind. We're going to charge you per bucket cost, and I don't know that figure right now, but when they ultimately end up with a completed job, it is now maybe thousands of dollars or much greater cost than what you're expecting it to be. What do you suggest for people in that situation?
Well, first of all, I would suggest that you talk to the company directly, whether it's Googling their phone number yourself, talking to management, see what they charge per square foot. Most companies are going to have a pretty set in stone number on what they're going to charge you per square foot. Very rarely will you ever run into somebody that says, I don't know how much it's going to cost me to do this work. So that's number one. Get it in writing when they do give you a price, so that they can't change on you or start charging you for all these unforeseen circumstances that they may run into. Get it in writing. And like I said, if you feel like they're not being honest with you, talk to somebody at the office about what's going on.
Yeah, good advice because if they are a reputable company, they will have somebody in a management role or somebody that you can refer to and know that you don't have to have that finalized immediately. You can always say, I'm not comfortable with this. We're going to have to, stop our relationship here today, but we can reassess this. And if you feel uncomfortable, you ask them to leave and you can call 911 for our assistants to show up. So I think oftentimes, like you say, we have that Minnesota nice where people know maybe something feels off, but they just want to kind of wrap it up. So they're willing to just pay them and say, well, I'm going to have to figure it out. And ultimately, people are really quick, these criminals, of cashing checks within minutes, sometimes of leaving a property. So it doesn't even give somebody much time to kind of stop and comprehend after the people have left the home to say, is this feel all okay to me? And am I okay with how this situation unfolded? And maybe before somebody has time to process through that, we see checks already cashed and money is then transferred hands. So um, I think we do often see a lot of pressured sales happening. Let's talk a little bit about what are some prevention tips that people can do to lessen chances of being a victim. I know we kind of touched on a few here and there, but what are some ideas you have for people?
Well, number one, uh, talk to people in the neighborhood, see companies that they've used that they trust. It never hurts to go online and read reviews on companies. Um, be very cautious. It's so cliche, but if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. A lot of times people will try to throw these good deals at you and they turn out to not be a very good deal. So that's super important too, just watching for that stuff. Get any agreement that you have in writing. Uh, and like I said before, if you feel like somebody's not being honest with you or they're not giving you a straight answer, call their office, talk to management, and try to see, you know, if you can work through the problems with them. Also, like Katie talked about earlier, we have seen those distraction kind of scams, people getting you outside, you know, make sure your house is locked up. If you go out the back door, make sure the front door is locked, make sure the garage is closed, all those kind of things so that somebody can't gain access to your house while you are outside. And then, yeah, the payment precautions, not paying people up front that show up at your house, um, and not allowing them in if they're not doing work inside.
Sounds great. Good tips for sure. And I think oftentimes people um, engage in these sales at home at their home that they weren't even thinking about. Um, They didn't wake up on the Saturday and think, I think I'm going to seal coat my driveway today, or I'm going to engage with a pest company today. So oftentimes, I think it's really about making sure you're not just suddenly going for these deals and agreements that you weren't necessarily even looking for. So if you are looking for asphalt, then feel free to look into multiple companies, get multiple reviews and bids. If you're looking for replacement siding or windows, the hope would be you kind of research those versus take somebody who just shows up at your door. So it's often easy to have that mentality that, they're not all delicious Girl Scout cookies that come showing up. And if you weren't really looking to purchase it at that moment, that's a good indicator to say, maybe I need to step back a minute and what do I know about this? Or maybe I need to become more educated about this topic and subject before I actually engage in roofing or windows or siding or driveways or whatever have you, because we see them in multiple different forms. Um, and I think, yeah, making sure on that identification and authenticity is another good key piece. Making sure on that solicitor license and company information. Putting a name on a business card or even on a vehicle doesn't necessarily mean that it's a legit, good quality company. So take that extra time to do the work ahead of time and don't just trust the information in front of you. What can people do to help in this situation? I always like to give people some tips on resources that they can take away from this.
So number one, most importantly, not just for scams, but for protecting your neighborhood in general, is keep an eye out for suspicious activity. Call, report it. Don't be afraid. I talk to people all the time that say, I just didn't want to call you guys. I just didn't want to bother you. But that is what we're here for. Usually people being, aware of what's going on in their neighborhood is the reason that we're able to catch people doing things. So reporting suspicious behavior is probably the biggest thing. If you notice somebody walking around your neighbor's property or your property, just call 911. We can check it out. We can find out what they're doing there, and be looking out for your neighbors. Especially the older people in the neighborhood, the seniors. We want to make sure that we're looking out for them because unfortunately they're victimized quite often. Reporting unlicensed solicitors is super important too, because there's a reason that the city has that ordinance is because we want to make sure that these are reputable people, reputable companies that aren't going to take advantage of the citizens here. And so that's very important. And like I said earlier, make sure that, if somebody does get offended by you asking for their license, then that's pretty much a red flag that something's going on. But we'll come out and we'll verify who they are. And, you know, these are going to be the ways that we keep them out of our neighborhoods. And also, if something happened down the block, we might have a suspect for a later date.
So true. Great information. I always like to encourage people to spread the word. It's like you say, take care of your neighbors, pass this information on, engage in conversations with people who could be easily victimized to help prevent them from falling from these types of criminal activities. And if you have that hunch feeling, I always like to talk about that, or naturally we sometimes get that feeling of something seems off, should I call, that seems unique, I'm not sure how I feel about it. All of those times that you ever get that kind of indicator is, to me, a red flag that says just call 911. It's really a way that your body's saying, hey, check in here, and we often ignore those signs, and we often don't take action. So really call in on any of those hunches, and we'll certainly assist as we can to help verify the validity of a situation. And I also want to say that our work in law enforcement is really only effective with the community's help. If we're the only ones doing the work, then in this regard for crime prevention work and trying to keep the community safe, it makes our job so much more difficult and less successful. So we are just so much more effective with the community being those eyes and ears, being aware of what's happening, sharing information, and having those observant neighbors. So A big key part of that is being active in neighborhood watch programs. That's the program I specifically help navigate here for the city of Bloomington. And if you don't have an active neighborhood watch group and are interested in learning about ways that you can come a little bit more engaged in that and take this information to help keep your neighborhood more safe for all, then certainly reach out to me. I'm happy to talk about getting your group a little bit more active or up and running. So like we say, we always do appreciate and rely upon our community, and we have a great community here in Bloomington. So we are appreciative for you taking the time to tune in today to listen to us share some of our information with you about these home scams. Hopefully it helps keep you safe in your properties, and know that we're here as a resource for any follow-up questions, concerns, or if you want us to go into any detail or in depth on anything, feel free to reach out to myself or Detective Hayes. Our information is here on the screen should you have any follow-up questions. I just want to thank you so much, Detective Hayes, for joining me here today and taking time out of your busy schedule to talk about this important topic. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Katie. I appreciate it.
Have a good day, everybody.